The air inside the Grant Tech boardroom was taut with expectation, thick with the kind of silence that falls when fortunes hang on the edge of a signature. The table stretched long and heavy, its polished wood gleaming beneath the sterile brilliance of recessed lights. Every detail had been rehearsed to perfection, the crystal glasses sweating with champagne, the neat stacks of folders, the subtle hum of cameras and recorders waiting to capture a historic moment. Outside, the Chicago skyline pulsed with lights, a living backdrop for what was meant to be the crowning achievement of Lucas Grant's career. At the head of the table sat Lucas, pen poised between his fingers, the contract before him a gateway to unimaginable expansion. The merger with Aegis Capital Group promised more than wealth. It promised power, security, and dominance in a ruthless market. Around him, directors leaned forward, eyes gleaming with the hunger of investors smelling blood. Trevor Hale of Aegis watched him with a predator's smile, and beside him sat Marco Reyes, Lucas's oldest friend, his chief operating officer, the man he trusted like a brother. Marco's expression was calm, supportive, his lips curled in a smile that to anyone else spoke loyalty. But to Lucas, something about it felt strange in that moment of poised hesitation. The silence broke with a faint squeak. The boardroom door slid open. A cleaning cart rolled in, its wheels stuttering softly across the carpet. No one paid it more than a passing glance. The janitorial staff came and went, their presence invisible in the machinery of high finance. Isabel Cruz pushed the cart, her uniform plain, her hair tied back. She moved with quiet deference, her head bowed as though apologizing for intruding upon a pantheon of wealth. "Apologies," she murmured, her voice so low it barely reached them. "I will only empty the bin." The laughter and chatter resumed, glasses clinking as Trevor toasted early victories, as if the ink was already dry. Isabel glided to Lucas's chair, kneeling to replace the wastebasket liner. Her movements were ordinary, unremarkable. Then, leaning just enough for her lips to be near his ear, she whispered, "Do not sign. It is a trap." The world froze, the words cut through him sharper than any contract clause ever could. The pen trembled in his grip, a bead of ink hanging at the tip. His hand faltered. The pen slipped and clattered against the wood with a sound so small, yet resounding, that Lucas felt it in his chest. "What?" Lucas whispered, his voice raw, stunned. Isabel stood without looking at him, eyes forward, face blank. She lifted the bin, set it onto her cart, and began to wheel it away as if nothing had been said. Lucas stared after her, his breath shallow. Around him, the voices pressed closer. "Lucas," Trevor urged, irritation creeping into his tone. "Let us proceed. The time is now." Marco leaned slightly, his voice soft, a smile curving across his lips. "Everything all right, my friend." Lucas's eyes darted between them, returning to the retreating figure at the door. His chest tightened. He felt as though the walls themselves had shifted, the room tilting under the weight of unseen truths. "I need 5 minutes," Lucas said, his voice sharp, cutting through the din. 5 minutes. Marco's smile stiffened. Trevor scoffed, his composure cracking. "This is absurd. All terms are settled. There is nothing left to discuss." 5 minutes, Lucas repeated, his tone firm. The boardroom door closed behind Lucas with a muffled thud, sealing in the rising tide of murmurs and restless objections. The carpeted corridor stretched before him, silent and sterile, the kind of hallway built for executives who rarely lingered in it. He moved quickly, his polished shoes whispering against the floor as his heart thudded in his chest. Ahead, Isabel pushed her cart, her back straight, her pace unhurried, as though nothing extraordinary had passed between them. "You!" Lucas called, his voice firm but edged with a strain he could not conceal. She stopped. Slowly she turned, her eyes meeting his with a calmness that unsettled him more than her words had. "With me, now," Lucas ordered. She hesitated only a moment, then nodded. Together they entered a small break room reserved for staff, its vending machines humming under fluorescent lights. Lucas shut the door with a decisive click. "Explain," he demanded, his arms crossed tightly. His gaze locked onto hers, a storm of disbelief and urgency. "You barged into the most important meeting of my career and told me to stop. Convince me you are not insane." Isabel gripped the edge of her cart as though steadying herself. The trash bag she held slipped slightly, rustling like a breath in the silence. "I know how it sounds," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "But I overheard conversations. Conversations no one else was meant to hear. They are setting you up." "Who are they?" Lucas pressed. "Trevor Hale and Marco Reyes," Isabel said, and at Marco's name, Lucas felt his stomach tighten. "They are using the contract to bury debt under your company. Once you sign, you will lose everything. They will leave you with nothing." Lucas let out a sharp laugh, though it carried no humor. "Do you realize what you are saying? Marco has been my partner, my friend, for 15 years. Trevor is one of the most powerful men in the city, and you expect me to believe this because you happened to overhear something while cleaning." "I do not expect you to believe me without proof," Isabel answered, her chin lifting slightly. "That is why I have it. Photos, recordings, documents. I can show you tonight, 7 o'clock, in this very room." Lucas studied her for a long moment, searching her face for cracks, for the telltale signs of a liar. But stillness, resolve, and a quiet flame were in her dark eyes. "If this is a lie," he said coldly, "if this is some story for attention or some trick, you are finished here." "I understand," Isabel replied without flinching. "But if I said nothing and you lost everything, I would never forgive myself." Lucas turned away, his reflection staring back from the break room glass, distorted by the hum of fluorescent light. Chicago sprawled beyond the tower windows, its ceaseless lights blinking indifferently at the small, fragile truths that could topple empires. He pressed his forehead against the glass momentarily, as if the cold surface might steady him. "What is your name?" he asked, not turning back. "Isabel," she answered. "And how long have you worked here?" 8 months, night shift." He faced her again, his expression unreadable. 7 o'clock, bring everything. If you fail to convince me, you will not have a job tomorrow." "I will be here," Isabel said. She gathered her cart and slipped out, the door shutting behind her with a whisper. Lucas remained, staring at the space she had left behind, the echo of her words still alive in the air. "Do not sign. It is a trap." Back in the boardroom, the contract lay waiting like a predator disguised in legal prose. Trevor leaned close to Marco, whispering with a grin that never touched his eyes. The directors shifted in their seats, restless and uncertain. When Lucas returned, silence fell again, heavy with expectation. "Did you resolve your concern?" Trevor asked, his tone slick with impatience. Lucas set the contract back on the table but did not sit. "I want to review a few clauses again." Trevor's brow furrowed. "We have spent weeks reviewing every clause. Every term has been settled. And that," Lucas replied, his voice low but firm, "is precisely why I want to look once more." He closed the folder with finality and slid it into his briefcase. "The meeting is adjourned until tomorrow." Marco rose to his feet, fists pressing into the polished table. "Lucas, this does not make sense. We are wasting time. Aegis has other prospects, and you know it." "Then let them," Lucas said, his eyes locking onto Marco's with an intensity that left no room for doubt. "One night will not change the world." Trevor slammed his hand against the table, echoing like a shot. "The market is volatile. Our stock is high. It is now or never." But Lucas had already turned, the weight of Isabel's whisper anchoring him against their protests. "The decision is mine," he said, his voice cutting through the room like steel. "We meet tomorrow." Without waiting for their replies, he walked out once more, the murmur of frustrated voices rising behind him like the hiss of snakes. In the solitude of the elevator descending to the lobby, Lucas closed his eyes. The city awaited him below, sprawling, glittering, merciless. But the path forward was not lined with certainty for the first time in years. It was paved with doubt, lit by a whisper, and shadowed by the betrayal of those he trusted most. That night would decide everything. The city outside Lucas's penthouse glittered with restless energy, but inside his office, the atmosphere was heavier than stone. The contract folder sat unopened on his desk, a silent predator waiting for him to fall back into its jaws. He poured himself a glass of water, though his hands shook enough to make the liquid ripple against the rim. Every instinct screamed at him to push the deal forward, trust the man who had stood beside him since college, and ignore the warning of a woman who emptied wastebaskets. Yet the echo of Isabel's whisper gnawed at him like a hidden infection. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock rattled the door. Lucas rose, pulse thudding in his ears, and opened it. Isabel stood there with her small backpack slung over her shoulder, her clothes plain but neat, her expression carrying none of the hesitation she had shown in the boardroom. She stepped inside, clutching her bag with both hands as if it contained the world's weight. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice steadier than he expected. "Show me," Lucas replied, his tone clipped, almost harsh. Isabel sat across from him at the small conference table. She opened her backpack and pulled out her phone, unlocking it with a swipe. "It started 3 weeks ago," she began. "I was cleaning near Marco's office late at night. I heard voices through the wall. I recognized his, and then I recognized hers." She tapped the screen and held it out. The image was grainy, shot through a narrow opening between the office door and frame. Marco leaned over his desk, Vanessa Leone close at his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm as they bent toward each other in whispered conversation. Lucas stared at the image, his chest tightening. "Go on." Isabel scrolled to an audio recording. Static crackled momentarily, then Marco's voice filled the room, clear despite the muffled background. "Once he signs, we will have everything. Lucas thinks he will retain 60%. In 48 hours, we will transfer the assets. He will be powerless before he even realizes Vanessa's laugh, followed, cruel, like glass breaking in the dark." The glass of water in Lucas's hand nearly slipped. He set it down hard against the table. More. Isabel swiped again. Screenshots filled the screen, side-by-side images of the contract. "This is the version you saw," she explained. "It shows you maintaining majority control. And this," she flicked to the next image, "is the one they plan to file. It reduces you to 20%, enough to make you a figurehead." Lucas leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the clauses. The differences were subtle, buried in legal jargon, yet devastating in their impact. His chest burned. She opened another file. This time, it was a screenshot of a bank transfer. $15 million transferred from an Aegis account into Marco's personal one. This was just last week. Lucas pushed back from the table, rising abruptly and pacing toward the window. The city shimmered far below, but its lights felt dim compared to the storm inside him. He pressed both hands against the glass as though he might steady the world through sheer force of will. "Marco has been my brother," he said, his voice low, trembling with disbelief. "We started with nothing. We built everything together." "Sometimes people change," Isabel said quietly. "Or maybe they were always this way, and you refused to see it." He turned back to her, his face etched with pain and anger. "Why are you telling me this? You have nothing to gain and everything to lose. If Marco or Trevor suspect you, I am telling you because it is the right thing to do," Isabel interrupted, her gaze locking onto his. "And because I cannot stand by while they destroy you. I know what it feels like to lose everything to people like them." Her words pierced deeper than any evidence could. For a moment, Lucas saw not a cleaner, but someone carrying scars of battles he could not yet imagine. He saw integrity, raw and unpolished, burning brighter than the gloss of all the executives he had surrounded himself with. "You will bring me everything you have tomorrow morning," Lucas said at last, his tone hardening. "Every photo, every recording, every document. If you cannot convince me fully, if this is even partly false, you are finished." "I understand," Isabel replied calmly. "I will be here." She gathered her things, slipping the phone back into her backpack, and rose to leave. Her footsteps faded down the hall, leaving Lucas alone with the weight of betrayal pressing in from every corner. He turned back to the contract folder and opened it, his eyes skimming over the neat, orderly lines of text. The pages he had nearly signed now glared back at him, barbs hidden in their legal precision. Lucas felt the ground shifting beneath him for the first time in his career, the certainty he had always relied upon unraveling into doubt. The night stretched long and restless. He poured a glass of scotch but barely touched it, pacing the room, replaying Marco's laughter, Vanessa's sneer, Isabel's whisper. He thought of the years beside Marco, college nights planning a business, mornings in cheap offices, the long grind of early failure, the sweet victories that had seemed impossible until they happened. Could all of it have been built on lies? At dawn, Lucas still had not slept. The city outside was bathed in pale light, the towers like jagged teeth biting into the horizon. He knew that when he faced Marco again, he would never see him the same. And though it shattered something inside him, he learned one thing with absolute clarity. Tomorrow, he would no longer be blind. The announcement came like a thunderclap through the building. A sudden order over the intercom summoned every employee to the main auditorium for an urgent safety meeting. Confusion rippled through the corridors, whispers bouncing from one cubicle to the next as hundreds of workers abandoned their desks. The atmosphere carried that strange tension of a fire drill mixed with dread, the kind of summons that always meant something important and rarely something good. Isabel walked quietly at the back of the crowd, her hands clasped tightly, the familiar ache of fear tightening her chest. She had risked everything by speaking to Lucas. The whisper, the evidence, the meeting in the break room could destroy her if the wrong ears discovered what she had done. And now, hearing her name echo unspoken in her mind, she feared they already knew. The auditorium filled quickly, its rows of chairs creaking beneath the weight of anxious bodies. Executives sat at the front, their tailored suits a sharp contrast to the company's clerical staff, and technicians clustered toward the back. Lucas was also seated in the front row, his expression unreadable. For a moment their eyes met, and Isabel felt a flicker of something, recognition, maybe even concern. But he looked away almost instantly, his jaw set like stone. Then Marco strode onto the stage. He carried a manila folder and a grim mask of authority on his face. His presence commanded the room, his polished shoes clicking against the wood floor, his gaze sweeping across the audience as if weighing each soul. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Marco began, his voice echoing through the microphone with practiced gravity. "I regret to inform you that we are facing a grave breach of trust within our company." A low murmur spread through the crowd. Marco let it simmer before continuing. "Yesterday, confidential documents were photographed and removed from the executive offices. This act constitutes a violation of security and an act of corporate espionage. After a thorough investigation, we have identified the culprit." The silence that followed was suffocating. Marco lifted his gaze toward the back of the room, his eyes locking on Isabel like a predator marking prey. "Isabel Cruz," he said, his voice a blade cutting through the air. "Please come forward." Every head turned, whispers swelled. Isabel felt her legs grow heavy, her breath short. But pride steadied her spine. She walked down the aisle, her steps echoing, her dignity intact despite the hundreds of eyes piercing her. Marco gestured to the folder in his hands. "Photos of confidential documents were found on your phone. How do you explain this?" The crowd gasped, faces twisted, some shocked, some suspicious, others smug with judgment. Lucas sat frozen in the front row, his face betraying neither belief nor disbelief. Isabel began, but Marco cut across her words. "Security footage shows you entering executive offices outside of scheduled cleaning hours." He held up glossy photographs, passing them along the front row. Images of her captured by grainy cameras filled the room with damning silence. Marco's voice rose with cold authority. Theft of intellectual property is a federal crime. But given your prior record, we will terminate your employment for cause rather than involving law enforcement. This is not fair. Isabel finally found her voice, her heart hammering. I was trying to protect. Protect what? Marco snapped, his voice laced with venom. Your own interests? Were you planning to sell our secrets to competitors? No, Isabel said, louder this time, her gaze darting to Lucas. I was protecting him. Enough, Marco thundered, slamming his hand against the podium. I will not allow a dishonest employee to defame this company or its leadership. The room buzzed with whispers. Isabel looked desperately at Lucas, her eyes pleading for him to speak, stand, and remember the whisper that had saved him from disaster. For a long moment he seemed on the verge of rising. Then he looked away, his voice soft, almost a whisper meant only for himself. I am sorry, Isabel. The evidence is clear. Her heart broke in that instant. The man she had risked everything to protect, the man she had believed might stand for truth, had abandoned her when she needed him most. Security guards stepped forward. Marco gestured at them with a cruel smile. Escort her out. Isabel pulled back as the guards reached for her arms, her dignity flaring like a final flame. I can walk, she said firmly. Tears streaked her face, but her voice held steady. She turned to Lucas one last time, her words carrying across the room. When you learn the truth, she declared, remember that you had the chance to do the right thing today, and you chose not to. Her words fell heavy, like stones thrown into still water, rippling across every face in the audience. Lucas closed his eyes as though her voice itself had struck him. Isabel walked out between the guards, her head held high, carrying a box of her few belongings. On the sidewalk outside, one of the guards handed it to her with a shameful glance. I am sorry, Miss Cruz, he muttered. Orders are orders. She nodded, her dignity unbroken even as her heart crumbled. Each step toward the subway station felt like walking deeper into exile. She had lost her job, reputation, or even her last chance to keep her sister's fragile life supported by the company health plan. But more than that, she carried the crushing weight of betrayal, not from her enemies, but from the man she had tried to save. Inside the auditorium, Lucas sat motionless long after the crowd dispersed. Marco approached and placed a hand on his shoulder with mock sympathy. It is hard, I know, he said smoothly. She seemed good, but some people let us down. Now we can move forward, unhindered. Lucas nodded slowly, but Isabel's voice echoed in his mind, louder than Marco's rehearsed consolation. You chose not to. And in that echo, doubt began to bloom like fire beneath the ashes. The city never truly slept, but to Lucas it felt like the lights of Chicago were mocking him. He sat alone in his office, the contract folder closed and untouched, the walls pressing in as if they knew the weight of his silence earlier that day. Isabel's voice haunted him, sharp and unyielding. You chose not to. He had watched her be escorted out of the auditorium, her dignity intact despite the humiliation. Every step she took away from him was another reminder of his failure. She had risked everything to warn and save him, and when the moment came for him to return that courage, he had folded beneath Marco's gaze and Trevor's carefully staged evidence. By 3 a.m, sleep was impossible. He turned on his computer, the screen's glow painting his face in pale light. If Isabel had been telling the truth, there would be a trace somewhere. People as arrogant as Marco and Trevor always left something behind. He began digging through the merger files, scanning every spreadsheet, every attachment, every line of small print. Hours passed like minutes. His eyes burned, but his mind sharpened with each irregularity uncovered. On page 47 of the contract, he found a reference to an addendum C, yet no such addendum existed in the official folder. When he searched deeper into the company's encrypted archives, he found it, hidden, mislabeled, locked behind layers of restricted access. The document chilled him to the bone. Post-merger asset distribution. 80% of Grant Tech's holdings were to be transferred to a Cayman Islands shell company. The listed shareholders were Marco Reyes and Vanessa Leon. His supposed brother-in-arms and the woman who once claimed to love him had constructed an elaborate trap in which he was nothing more than a signature, waiting to be exploited. Lucas printed the document, the machine's whir filling the silence like a drumbeat of betrayal. He dug further, tracing bank transfers marked as merger preparation. $23 million had been siphoned into Marco's personal accounts under coded transaction names. He scrolled through email servers and found messages between Marco and Trevor. Arrogant, casual, dripping with the certainty of their victory. One line seared itself into his memory. David is too blind to see betrayal. By the time he wakes up, it will be too late. His hands shook as he clicked through call recordings archived by security. Marco's voice filled the office as spoke with Vanessa. They laughed about his naivety, about his loyalty, about how predictable he was. Vanessa's words struck harder than any blow. I left him because he was small. With you, I can have everything. Lucas shut off the recording, bile rising in his throat. His stomach churned with rage and disbelief. The man who had stood beside him at his mother's funeral, the woman who once whispered promises of forever. Both of them had plotted his ruin with the kind of cold efficiency that left no room for doubt. But beneath the anger was something sharper, shame. He had doubted Isabel. He had watched her dragged out in front of everyone, her reputation shredded, her life destroyed. And he had said nothing. She had told him the truth when no one else dared, and he had chosen cowardice. By dawn, he had copied everything onto a flash drive and emailed it to himself through multiple accounts. He cleared his browser history, locked the printed files in his personal safe, and leaned back in his chair, exhausted, but alive with grim purpose. When his phone rang, the caller ID sent a shiver through him. Marco. Lucas. Marco's voice was falsely warm, the same tone he had used countless times. I could not sleep. What happened yesterday with that cleaning woman, it unsettled us all. I hope you are not doubting me. Lucas forced his voice to remain steady. The evidence was clear. Good, Marco said, relief coating every syllable. We signed today. Our big moment has finally arrived. Today, Lucas repeated, staring at the folder of proof he had uncovered. After hanging up, Lucas stood by the window, watching the sun rise over the city. Isabel had been right all along. She had risked everything to protect him, and he had failed her. But now he had the power to make it right. He would expose Marco and Vanessa, tear their scheme apart piece by piece, and reclaim his company. But even as resolve hardened in his chest, another truth twisted inside him. Saving Grant Tech was not enough, not anymore. He had to find Isabel. He had to make her see that he was not the man who had let her be humiliated in front of the world. He had to prove that he could choose courage over fear when it truly mattered. The night had stripped him bare, but also forged him anew. By the time the city stirred awake, Lucas Grant was no longer the blind man Marco believed him to be. He was a man who had seen betrayal in its rawest form and was ready to fight it. And this time, he would not be alone. The morning light cut sharply across the skyline as Lucas drove south, away from the glass towers and polished avenues he had always called his world. His BMW hummed over cracked asphalt and narrow streets lined with aging brick apartments, rusted fire escapes, and corner shops with signs in Spanish. It was Pilsen, a neighborhood he had never once set foot in, a place worlds away from Grant Tech Tower. The address he had pulled from HR records repeated in his mind. 847 Lincoln Street, apartment 2B. Isabel Cruz. 8 months on the night shift. There were too many truths in her file that no one had bothered to see. A degree in business administration. A stint at one of the most respected consulting firms in the world. A record that should have made her a rising star, not a woman pushing a cart through the shadows of his empire. He parked at the curb outside a tired 3-story building, its paint peeling, the windows patched with tape. Children played soccer in the alleyway, with a ball that barely held its shape, their laughter piercing through the chill of the morning air. Lucas hesitated, his tailored suit and polished shoes out of place here. For once, he felt exposed. Climbing the creaking stairs, he stopped at door 2B, his chest tightened as he raised his hand to knock. Shuffling footsteps came from inside. The door opened a crack, secured by a chain, revealing part of Isabel's face. Her eyes were swollen, rimmed red as if from a night of tears. "What do you want?" Her voice was cold, stripped of the steadiness she had shown before. "Isabel," Lucas said softly, "I need to talk to you. Please." "I found out the truth about Marco and Vanessa." Her bitter laugh slipped through the gap in the door. "How convenient. After you let them humiliate me in front of everyone. Just 5 minutes," he pleaded, touching the doorframe. "I can explain. I can clear your name." And before she could respond, a faint voice called from deeper in the apartment. "Who is it, Isa?" Isabel sighed, her face twisting with conflict. She unhooked the chain and opened the door. The apartment was small, its furniture worn but carefully arranged, spotless despite its age. Family photos lined the wall. A young woman emerged from the hallway, pale and frail, her steps measured and slow. "This is my sister, Maria," Isabel said quietly. "Maria, this is David Miller." Maria extended a trembling hand with a faint smile. "You must be Isa's boss. She says you are different, more human than the others." "Former boss," Isabel corrected quickly, bitterness in her voice. Lucas shook Maria's hand gently, his chest tightening as he looked at her pallor, the fatigue in her eyes. He saw not only frailty but trust, the trust that had already been broken once. "Maria, why don't you rest?" Isabel urged softly. Her sister nodded and shuffled back to her room, leaving them in heavy silence. "Why didn't you tell me?" Lucas asked. "About her condition?" Isabel looked away, her arms folding protectively. "I told you I needed the insurance. I did not think you cared about the details." "What kind of surgery?" "Heart valve transplant," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Without it, she might have 6 months." Lucas's breath caught. "How much?" "200,000, Isabel said, her eyes flashing. 60% covered by the company plan, which I no longer have, thanks to you." His guilt slammed into him like a physical blow. "I can pay for it," he said quickly. "I will cover everything." Her laugh was harsh, cutting. "No, I do not want your pity, or your charity. You betrayed me once. I will not let you think you can buy forgiveness." "It is not pity," Lucas insisted, stepping closer. "It is a responsibility. I failed you, I failed her, and I will not walk away again." "You had the chance to prove who you were," Isabel snapped, her eyes glistening, "and you chose silence." Lucas swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "You are right. I was a coward, but I know the truth now. Marco and Vanessa planned everything. I have the evidence. With your help, I can destroy them." Her gaze lingered on him, heavy with pain and disbelief. "Do it without me," she said, walking to the door and holding it open. "I cannot trust you anymore. Leave." Standing in the doorway, he hesitated, the weight of everything unsaid pressing on his chest. "This is not over. I will expose them, and I will clear your name." She did not look at him as she replied, "Do whatever you want. Just leave us out of it." The door closed with a final click and the lock turned. Lucas descended the stairs slowly, each step echoing with shame. Outside, he sat in his car, staring up at the cracked windows of the building. Isabel had risked everything for him, and he had given her nothing in return but humiliation. Now she and her sister faced a battle they should never have had to fight alone. He clenched the steering wheel, his jaw tight. He would not fail her again, not Isabel, not Maria. He would find a way to protect them, even if she never forgave him. For the first time in years, Lucas Grant was no longer thinking of mergers or power. He was thinking of redemption. The following days were a blur of restless hours and unshakable guilt. Lucas sat in his corner office, the skyline of Chicago stretched before him like a glittering lie. To the outside world, nothing had changed. Grant Tech continued to operate, investors called with congratulations, and Trevor Hale pressed for the signing date with a patience that was running dangerously thin. But inside Lucas, everything was fractured. He replayed the scene in the auditorium over and over again. Isabel stood alone on the stage, accused and ridiculed, her voice breaking as she pleaded with him to remember the truth. His silence had cut deeper than Marco's accusations. It was not Marco who had destroyed her. It was his failure to stand beside her. When the night came, Lucas drove again without a destination. The streets pulled him south, back toward Pilsen. He told himself it was foolish, that she would not see him and had every right to despise him. But guilt was stronger than reason. He parked in the same spot outside the crumbling building, staring at the dark windows of apartment 2B. He sat gripping the steering wheel for long minutes, uncertain if he dared to climb those stairs again. Finally, he stepped out. The building's hallway smelled of dust and cooking oil, the scent that clung to walls aged by decades. At her door, he knocked softly. For a moment, there was no sound. Then footsteps shuffled, and the door cracked open, the chain still fastened. Isabel's tired eyes appeared in the gap. "I told you to leave us out of this," she said flatly. "I know," Lucas replied, his voice low, "but I cannot. Not after what I saw." "I do not care what you saw," she snapped. "You made your choice when you stayed silent." "Isabel, listen," he said quickly, desperation breaking through. "I went through the files. Addendum C, the hidden contracts, the transfers. Everything you told me, it was true. Marco and Vanessa are planning to strip me of everything. I have proof now." Her eyes narrowed. "And now you want me to help you?" "No," Lucas said, shaking his head. "I want to help you. I know about Maria. I know about the surgery. Let me—" "Stop." Isabel's voice was sharp enough to silence him. "You do not get to walk into my home and speak her name. You do not get to talk about helping when you could not even speak up while I was dragged out like a criminal." Her words hit him harder than any blow. He lowered his head, shame burning hot in his chest. "You are right," he said softly. "I failed you. I was afraid, but I cannot undo what I did. All I can do now is fight the people who tried to destroy us both. And if you never forgive me, I will still fight." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Isabel studied his face, her own torn between anger and something she would not name. Then she closed the door without another word, the chain rattling into place. Lucas stood in the dim hallway, the rejection cutting deep. Yet beneath the pain, a fire grew stronger. He would not walk away, not again. Back at his apartment, he sat before his safe and pulled out the stack of documents he had printed. Each sheet was a weapon, a piece of the puzzle that could tear Marco and Vanessa apart. But the more he stared at them, the clearer one truth became. Exposing them would not be simple. They held power, influence, and leverage. They had already twisted the narrative once to destroy Isabel. He arrived earlier than usual, the hallways still half asleep, with only a scattering of assistants bustling to prepare for the day. The marble floors reflected his every step, making his approach feel louder, heavier, more final. By 10, Marco was already waiting in his office. He leaned casually against the edge of the desk, his tie loosened, his expression calculated and calm. Vanessa stood nearby, immaculate in a cream suit, her hair pulled back so tightly that not a strand dared to fall out of place. "Lucas," Marco said, his tone too smooth, too practiced. "We need to talk." Lucas kept his posture straight, his face unreadable. "Then talk." Marco gestured for him to sit. "No games. We know what you did last night. Digging your company?" Vanessa's voice cut in like glass. "Not for much longer, unless you cooperate." Marco slid a phone across the desk toward him. On the screen were photos. Lucas entering Isabel's building in Pilsen. Lucas and Isabel talking at a cafe. The kiss on the corner under the glow of a streetlight. Lucas's stomach turned. "So what?" he said sharply. "There is nothing wrong with those." "Really?" Vanessa's smile was venomous. She pulled a folder from her briefcase and opened it with slow deliberation. "We have proof you used company resources to track down a former employee." "Proof you used company funds to pay for her sister's surgery. To anyone else, it looks like bribery, abuse of power. A CEO sneaking around with a cleaning lady, funneling money to her family, covering his tracks, or two respected executives with a meticulously documented case? The room spun. Lucas gripped the armrest of the chair. You would go this far, threatening her sister. Marco's smile widened. We already have. If you do not sign the contract today, Isabel and her sister will lose more than health insurance. Accidents happen, Lucas, especially to people in poor health. A chill spread through his veins. For a moment, he saw Maria's pale face, her fragile smile, the hope in her eyes when she said he seemed different from other bosses. He saw Isabel's dignity as she walked out of the auditorium, broken but unbowed. And now, then forget about Isabel Cruz, forever. Vanessa stepped closer, her perfume sharp, suffocating. Do that, and her sister gets her surgery. She gets to live. You get to keep your reputation. Everyone wins. Lucas looked at the folder of forged documents, at the photos designed to twist truth into scandal. He looked at Marco's confident smile, at Vanessa's cold, glittering eyes. He felt the walls of his empire closing in, the price of silence pressing on his chest like a vice. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Isabel's name flashed across the screen. She was waiting in the lobby, expecting the meeting where he would expose the traitors. He thought of answering, of telling her everything. That is what I loved about you once. The meeting ended with polite handshakes, but as Lucas walked out of the office, his chest felt hollow. He had protected Isabel and Maria, for now, but at the cost of his company, his pride, and perhaps his soul. And in the silence of the elevator descending to the lobby, he realized the cruelest truth. Silence had a price, and he had just agreed to pay it. That night, Isabel could not sleep. The sudden cancellation of the board meeting, Lucas's strange avoidance, the hollowness in his voice when he told her over the phone that there were complications, all of it pressed against her mind like a weight she could not throw off. She had trusted him once, and he had abandoned her. Now he claimed to know the truth, and yet something kept him chained. She needed to know what it was. By 9 in the evening, the Grant Tech building was nearly deserted, its gleaming halls patrolled only by a handful of night guards who barely glanced at the cleaning staff. Isabel still knew every back entrance, every staircase, and every door code, which rarely changed. With her hood pulled low and her steps silent, she slipped inside. The service elevator rattled up to the executive floor. She crept through shadowed corridors, her pulse pounding with every echo of her footsteps. Marco's office loomed at the end of the hall, its door ajar as if he had left in haste. Papers lay scattered across the desk, drawers unlocked. Isabel's instincts sharpened. She pulled out her phone and began snapping photos. Contracts with altered clauses. Bank transfers are hidden under vague labels. More evidence than she had dared to hope. Then her eyes caught something else. A pen holder that felt oddly heavy when she lifted it. She twisted the base. A faint click sounded. Inside, hidden beneath a false casing, was a small digital recorder. Her hands trembled as she connected it to her phone. Dozens of files appeared, time-stamped and labeled only by date. She scrolled to the most recent one, which was recorded that very afternoon. With her headphones pressed tight, she listened, and her blood ran cold. Marco's voice, calm but merciless. If he does not sign, we will ruin him. We will ruin her. I have contacts. One phone call, and Maria Cruz will never make it to surgery. Vanessa's silky tone followed. And if he tries to fight, we will bury him with forged records. No one will believe a man who sneaks around with a cleaning woman. Isabel's breath caught. They knew. They had been watching her and Lucas both, twisting every action into ammunition. And worst of all, they had targeted Maria, her sister, her fragile heart, the very lever Marco now threatened to snap. She copied the recordings onto her phone, her hands steady despite the storm inside. Proof. At last, undeniable proof, not just of fraud, but of blackmail. Slipping out the same way she had entered, Isabel kept her head low as she crossed the lobby. The guards did not stop her. The city outside was cool and alive with midnight lights. She walked fast, clutching the phone as if it were her sister's beating heart. At dawn, she stood at Lucas's apartment door, her knuckles striking hard against the wood. He answered in a robe, his face hollow from sleeplessness. "What are you doing here so early?" he asked, wary, almost defeated. "I know why you canceled," Isabel said firmly, stepping inside without waiting for his permission. She pulled out her phone and hit play. Marco's voice filled the room, damning and irrefutable. Vanessa's laughter followed like poison. Lucas staggered back as if struck. "You heard this? I recorded it." Marco left his own trap behind. "I have everything. The fraud, the forged contracts, and the blackmail threats. They cannot silence us if we use this." Lucas collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "They threatened you. They threatened Maria. I thought keeping quiet was the only way to keep you safe." "Silence will not protect us," Isabel said, her voice low but fierce. "If you stay quiet, they win. And they will come for you anyway. The only safety is to expose them before they destroy us all." Lucas lifted his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers. For the first time since she had whispered in his ear, she saw not hesitation, not fear, but fire. "What do you suggest?" he asked. "Reschedule the board meeting today," Isabel said. "This time, we walk in together. We show them everything." Lucas nodded, his chest heaving. He reached for her hand, hesitated, then clasped it firmly. "Then today decides everything." Outside, the sun climbed over the city, painting the towers gold. Inside, in that quiet apartment, two people who had once stood on opposite sides of power were preparing to fight side by side. For truth, for justice, for each other. And neither Marco nor Vanessa had the faintest idea that the recorder they once used as a weapon would become the very chain that dragged them into ruin. The auditorium buzzed with a low, restless murmur as board members filed in, their polished shoes clattering against the marble floor, their conversations clipped and sharp. Grantech's executives sat in neat rows, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and impatience. At the front of the room, Trevor Hale leaned casually against the podium, radiating the smug confidence of a man certain of victory. Beside him sat Marco Reyes and Vanessa Leone, both wearing masks of calm so carefully constructed that only someone who knew them well would see the flicker of anticipation in their eyes. Lucas entered last, his shoulders squared, his briefcase clutched like a weapon. The noise in the room softened, then silenced altogether. Behind him, Isabel walked steadily, her chin raised, her presence commanding in spite of the memory of her recent humiliation in this very space. Whispers spread instantly, the kind that ripple like sparks along dry wood. Trevor's smirk faltered. Marco's eyes narrowed. Vanessa shifted in her seat. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lucas began, his voice steady, each word deliberate. "Thank you for gathering on such short notice. Today, we will decide the future of Grantech. But before any contract is signed, there are truths that must be brought to light." He gestured to Isabel, who stepped forward. The whispers grew louder, disbelief palpable. Just days ago, she had been branded a thief. Now she stood tall, facing them again, not as a cleaner, but as a woman holding the fate of the company in her hands. "You all remember me," Isabel said, her voice clear and strong. "The so-called spy, the so-called thief. But what you were shown was a performance staged to protect the real betrayal happening inside these walls." Gasps fluttered across the room. Marco half rose from his seat. "This is outrageous. Lucas, are you really—" "Sit down," Lucas cut him off coldly, his voice carrying an authority that silenced even the most skeptical director. "You will have your chance to speak, after." He nodded to Isabel. She tapped her phone, the speakers crackled to life, filling the auditorium with Marco's voice. "If he does not sign, we will ruin him. We will ruin her. One phone call and Maria Cruz will never make it to surgery." The room erupted in shouts and gasps. Faces turned pale, hands covered mouths. Marco's composure cracked, his face draining of color. "That recording," Vanessa shouted, rising to her feet, "was obtained illegally. It proves nothing." "On the contrary," Lucas said, his eyes boring into hers. "It proves everything. Combined with these, he opened his briefcase, producing copies of the altered contracts, the fraudulent transfers, the incriminating emails. Assistants rushed to distribute them down the rows. Murmurs rose into a storm as the documents were passed from hand to trembling hand. Trevor pushed off the podium, his calm facade slipping. "You do not understand what you are doing, Lucas. These are powerful people you are challenging. If you walk away now, no one needs to get hurt." Lucas turned to face him, his voice steady, his eyes blazing. "I built this company with integrity. I will not sell it to liars. And I will not let traitors," he glanced at Marco and Vanessa, "destroy it from the inside." Security guards at the back of the room shifted uneasily, unsure where to look. Some executives stood, demanding answers. Others stared in silence, the truth unraveling their certainty. Isabel spoke again, her words slicing through the chaos. "Marco and Vanessa tried to frame me because I discovered the truth. They counted on my silence. They counted on his." She nodded toward Lucas, "But silence is no longer for sale." At that moment, the doors of the auditorium opened. Two uniformed detectives strode in, their badges gleaming under the lights. Detective Johnson stepped forward, his voice carrying over the din. "Marco Reyes, Vanessa Leone, you are under arrest for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." Shock swept the room. Gasps turned into applause from some corners, outrage from others. Marco lunged to his feet, his voice breaking into a snarl. "This is not over, Lucas. You will regret this." Two officers seized his arms, snapping handcuffs into place. Vanessa struggled, spitting curses, her perfect composure shattered at last. The sight of her dragged across the floor silenced even her most ardent allies. Detective Johnson handed Lucas a nod of respect. "Miss Cruz provided us with everything this morning. The case is airtight." As Marco and Vanessa were led away, Lucas turned to Isabel. Their eyes met, the chaos of the room fading around them. He stepped closer, his voice meant only for her. "You saved me, again." "No," Isabel said softly, though her eyes shone. "We saved each other." The auditorium thundered with applause, not just for the fall of traitors, but for the rise of truth. For the first time in years, Lucas felt not like a man fighting alone in a tower of glass and steel, but like a leader standing side by side with someone whose courage had already changed everything. And as he looked at Isabel, he knew one thing with unshakable certainty. This was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning. 2 weeks had passed since the boardroom erupted into chaos, since Marco and Vanessa were dragged away in handcuffs, their empire of deception crumbling under the weight of their own arrogance. Grant Tech still stood, but the halls felt different now. The whispers that once carried suspicion now carried admiration for the man who had dared to stand against betrayal, and for the woman who had been brave enough to speak when no one else would. Lucas moved through the building with a new energy, sharper and steadier than before. Every handshake from a board member, every nod from an employee, carried a silent acknowledgement that he had faced ruin and chosen truth. But beneath his calm exterior, he knew the company needed more than a symbolic victory. Grant Tech's reputation had been scarred, and it would take careful rebuilding to restore faith. That morning, Isabel walked into her new office. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating stacks of reports neatly arranged across the desk. The brass plaque outside read Vice President of Operations. She still found herself pausing whenever she saw it, struggling to reconcile the title with the woman she had been only weeks earlier, pushing a cart through quiet corridors, invisible to those she now commanded. She took a seat, scanning through the latest reports on restructuring. Yet, her thoughts drifted. Maria's surgery had been scheduled and covered through what the hospital claimed was a federal aid program. Isabel suspected otherwise, though Lucas had never admitted his role. For once, she chose not to push. Gratitude was not weakness, but pride still kept her lips sealed. A knock came at the door. Lucas leaned casually against the frame, a small smile on his face. "Madam Vice President, do you have a moment for your CEO?" She chuckled softly. "Only if you brought something more interesting than spreadsheets." In answer, he lifted a bouquet of deep red roses. "I thought you might need a reminder that you are more than your title." Her cheeks warmed despite herself. "You did not have to." "I did," Lucas said firmly, stepping closer. "Because I need you to know something. You did not just save my company. You saved me. From blindness, from cowardice, from becoming a man I would have hated." Isabel studied him for a moment. He was not the same man she had first whispered to in the boardroom, nor the one who let her be dragged away in silence. This Lucas carried scars now, but also clarity. Before she could answer, his phone buzzed. He frowned, glancing at the screen. "The press wants another statement. Investors are circling, some cautious, some eager. Everyone wants to know what comes next." "What does come next?" Isabel asked. Lucas lowered the phone slowly. "That depends on us, on how we choose to rebuild. I could chase new contracts, restore profits, and expand the empire. But maybe the real future is not in becoming bigger, but in becoming better." Her heart stirred at the words. For the first time, she saw a vision not clouded by ambition, but anchored in integrity. Later that evening, they drove to North Avenue Beach. The October sun bled across Lake Michigan, staining the sky with fire. They walked along the sand in silence until Lucas stopped, turning to face her. "Do you remember the first time we spoke?" he asked. "In the boardroom," Isabel said softly, "when I whispered not to sign." He nodded. "You risked everything for me that day, and I nearly destroyed you for it. But you still came back. You still fought. You still believed the truth mattered more than your safety. I will never forget that." Her breath caught when he reached into his pocket and dropped to one knee, the setting sun framing him in gold. He opened a velvet box. Inside gleamed a simple diamond ring, elegant and unpretentious. "Isabel Cruz," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "You walked into my life as a cleaning woman and became my savior, my partner, and the love of my life. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision. Memories of humiliation, of nights spent fearing for Maria's future, of Lucas's silence that had once broken her, all of it melted into this moment where he knelt not as a CEO, but as a man asking for forgiveness and love. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, stronger. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She laughed through her tears. "How did you know my size?" "I asked Maria," Lucas admitted with a smile. "Actually, I asked for her blessing too." "And what did you promise her?" "That I would dedicate my life to making you both happy. That family comes before everything." Isabel pulled him into a kiss, the waves rolling gently behind them, the city lights beginning to glow in the distance. 3 months later, autumn painted Chicago in red and gold. In the lush glass halls of the Lincoln Park Conservatory, Isabel walked down the aisle in a simple, elegant gown. Maria, her heart repaired and her health restored, walked beside her, radiant with joy. At the altar, Lucas waited, his eyes never leaving hers. When she reached him, he whispered, "You look perfect. And you look like a man I can finally trust," Isabel replied, her voice trembling with happiness. Before family, friends, and colleagues, they exchanged vows, not promises of wealth or power, but of integrity, partnership, and love. When they kissed, the room erupted in applause. For some, it was the union of two leaders who had saved a company. For others, it was proof that truth and courage could still survive in a world of ambition and betrayal. For Isabel and Lucas, it was simply the beginning of a new life built not on contracts or lies, but on trust hard-won and love freely given. Winter had begun to soften its grip on Chicago, the harsh winds giving way to crisp mornings where the sun broke through a pale sky and cast long golden rays across the skyline. From the top floor of Grant Tech Tower, Lucas looked out over the city with a quiet that would have seemed impossible months earlier. The company that once teetered on the edge of betrayal now thrived with renewed purpose. But what mattered most to him was not the rise in profits or the surge of investor trust. It was the life he was building with Isabel. Her laughter carried into his office before she appeared, her steps confident, her eyes alight with the unmistakable energy of someone who had fought hard battles and won them. She wore no mask, no trace of the quiet cleaning woman she had once been forced to become. In its place was a leader, respected and admired. In one hand she carried a stack of files, in the other, a gentle touch to her stomach, a small smile playing on her lips.
"You should be resting," Lucas said, rising from behind his desk.
"And let you drown in numbers?" Isabel teased. "Not a chance. Besides, the doctor said staying active is good. I am pregnant, not fragile." He crossed the room and kissed her lightly. "Still, our future vice president deserves all the care in the world." She laughed, shaking her head. "Already planning a career path for our child?" "Only if they inherit your courage," he said softly. Together they sat, flipping through reports, but neither of them cared much for the numbers tonight. The real victory was the fact that they could sit side by side, no longer burdened by secrets or lies. For so long their lives had been shaped by betrayal, Marco's ambition, Vanessa's cruelty, Trevor's manipulation. Now everything felt like it was being rebuilt, not just on new foundations for the company, but for their family as well. That evening they hosted a small dinner at their apartment. Maria joined them, her cheeks glowing with health that had seemed impossible only months earlier. She moved with energy, her laughter ringing bright as she set the table. At one point, she pulled Isabel into a tight embrace and whispered, "You finally look happy, Isa. Really happy." "I am," Isabel replied, her eyes glancing toward Lucas. "For the first time in my life, I am." The conversation flowed easily, stories mixing with laughter. Yet, in the quiet moments, Lucas caught himself studying Isabel, the way her hand often lingered protectively over her belly, the way her eyes softened when she looked at her sister. For years, he had believed success was measured in contracts, mergers, and towers of glass. Now, he knew better. Success was this: family, trust, love born out of fire and hardship. A month later, Grant Tech unveiled a new initiative under Isabel's leadership. It was not another merger, not another grab for power, but a program dedicated to mentoring young professionals from disadvantaged backgrounds. Isabel stood on the stage, speaking not as a figurehead, but as someone who had lived the life she was describing. "I was overlooked because I did not fit the mold," she said, her voice strong. "But talent, courage, and integrity know no boundaries of class or origin. Here at Grant Tech, we will invest in people, not just those who already shine in the spotlight, but those whose brilliance has been hidden in the shadows." The applause was thunderous. Lucas watched from the wings, pride swelling in his chest. She had transformed the company into more than a machine for profit. She had given it a heart. That night, after the event, they walked along the Riverwalk, the city lights shimmering in the water. Snow flurries drifted softly, settling on Isabel's dark hair. Lucas slipped his arm around her and whispered, "You have given Grant Tech something I never could. You have given it soul." She leaned into him, smiling. "We gave it soul." Together, months passed, seasons shifted. The conservatory where they had exchanged vows was now a place they often visited on quiet afternoons, Maria joining them sometimes, her laughter echoing among the orchids. The company flourished, but more importantly, their home flourished. On a warm summer morning, Isabel gave birth to a daughter. They named her Sophia, after Isabel's mother, a woman whose strength had carried them through childhood. As Lucas held the tiny child in his arms for the first time, tears filled his eyes. "She is perfect," he whispered. Isabel, exhausted but glowing, smiled. "She will know a world built on truth, not lies, on love, not ambition." Lucas kissed her forehead. "She will know a world where her mother's courage is the greatest legacy she could inherit." Years later, as Grant Tech continued to rise, Isabel's program changed countless lives, and their daughter grew in the warmth of a family forged by fire. People still spoke of the scandal that once threatened to destroy them. But the story always ended the same, of how a woman whispered the truth when no one else dared, and how that whisper became the foundation of a new legacy. And whenever Lucas and Isabel walked together through the heart of the city, their hands clasped, their daughter skipping between them, they knew one truth with absolute certainty. Out of betrayal, they had built not just a company, not just a family, but a life that proved courage and love could survive anything. For them, the ashes of the past had become the foundation of something eternal.